Hello and welcome to today's class on credit. My name is Nichelle and I'm a financial coach with Prosperity Connection. Prosperity Connection is a nonprofit established in 2009. Our mission is to promote economic success for everyone in St. Louis through financial education, one-on-one coaching, and facilitating access to reliable financial products and services. All of our education and coaching is provided free of charge. So let's get started. So our goal today is to become familiar with the following ideas. 1, who needs to build good credit and why? 2, the significance of a credit report and score. What's in a credit report? You can access your credit report, how to obtain your credit report, how to dispute inaccurate information you find in your credit report, how to freeze your credit, and finally, how to establish or rebuild credit. So what is credit? Credit is essentially your financial report card. It tells someone how much you've borrowed, who you borrowed from, how well you've repaid your debts, and how you're handling your current debts. It can also let someone know whether or not you've been a victim of identity theft. And the importance of good credit is that you use credit across a lot of parts of your life, whether that's you're trying to get a lower interest rate on something like a car loan, you want to get a job, you're trying to lease property like an apartment, you're trying to establish utility services like gas or electricity, or you just simply want to obtain insurance for something like a car. It's good to know that by the time you're 18 or older, you can legally have credit in your name. This doesn't mean you don't have any credit in your name. And it sounds kind of weird, but essentially, and I'm sure you may have heard of this, of 13, 14, as young as 5-year-olds having credit cards, other accounts in their name, and then they turn 18, they find out all these accounts have been in their name. So just because you can't legally have credit in your name doesn't mean it's not there, and that's just a good thing to know. So why should we build good credit? Having good credit improves your image in the eyes of employers. So more and more employers now are actually using credit as a way to decide whether or not to hire certain people. There's some debate on whether or not it's fair, but at the end of the day, having good credit does improve your chances of being employed across a variety of industries and a variety of workplaces. It also improves your ability to get more credit. So it sounds a bit weird, but essentially if you can prove you have a history of paying your debts on time and staying in good standing, you're more likely to get more credit offered to you. It also improves your chances of getting lower interest rates. So a big reason credit scores are important is that the higher your credit score, the lower your interest rate. Essentially, lenders are not charging you as high of an interest rate because they don't have to worry as much about whether or not they will get paid back because you have a higher credit score. And because of that, you get cheaper rates on just about everything: car loans, car insurance, even apartments. So when you take out a car loan, the amount of money you pay back will be lower because you have that lower interest rate. A lot of people don't realize that things like car insurance, they actually do look at your credit score when determining the rate for your car insurance. And even apartments nowadays are looking at your credit report and your credit score as a way to decide how much security deposits to charge. So there's definitely been, if you have a poor credit score, you may be charged a higher security deposit. Some buildings even have a minimum credit score required before you can live there. Because of this, everyone needs to build good credit. Even if you never plan on taking out any debt and you only plan on living on cash, you will still at some point run into a moment when having good credit is very important. So what is a credit report and what's on it? On your credit report, you'll find the following information. The first one is identifying information. This is things like your name, your address, your social security number. It also has any previous names you've used or alternative names you've used. So say, for instance, you get married and change your name, or you just legally change your name, or you have a nickname that you normally go by. So your legal name is William, but you often go by Bill. That'll likely be in your credit report. The second thing you'll find is employment history. And so your employment history is really only updated when you apply for credit or things like a job or an apartment sometimes. And so because of that, your employment history may not always be exactly up to date. As an example, the last time I applied for credit was about 2 years ago. And so the place that my credit report says I work at is not my current job because it hasn't been updated since those 2 years ago. It's not an issue if your employment history isn't up to date. The most important part is making sure you recognize all of the workplaces listed in your employment history. You don't want a job on your employment history that you don't remember working at. The next one is creditors and payment history. So these are any loans you have, any credit cards you have, any medical debt you have. That would show up in your creditors and payment history. It tracks things like, have you missed any payments? Do you have any past due balances? Were your accounts closed in good standing? Do you have any accounts in collections? That's all the kind of information in the creditors and payment history section. What's also in there is if you've had any bankruptcies, as well as any inquiries you've initiated. So an inquiry is essentially whenever you look at your credit report or you give someone else permission to look at your credit report. This generally applies to looking into your credit when you're looking for a loan. So this is often referred to as a hard hit, the kind of credit inquiries that affect your credit score versus a soft hit. When you're just looking at credit for educational purposes, you're not looking for a loan. The ones that will show up on your credit report are those hard hits. A good thing to also know is that any negative information on your credit history does not last forever. So in the creditors and payment history section, a lot of that negative information generally will fall off after about 7 years. Bankruptcies generally fall off about 10 years, and inquiries generally fall off about 2 years. So 10 years from now, if you had a bankruptcy and I were to look at your credit report, I would not know you had a bankruptcy. Similar idea to negative payment history or any inquiries. So who is able to look at your credit report? In order to look at your credit report, a business must show that they have a legitimate interest in knowing your credit history. So that includes, as we mentioned before, lenders, landlords, employers, insurance companies, and financial institutions. Who isn't allowed to look at your credit report is someone who can't prove that they have a legitimate business interest. So, an ex-girlfriend cannot look at your credit score just because she wants to see what's going on, or some cousin you had can't look at your credit report unless you give them permission and you show them that credit report yourself. So for someone to look at the credit report without you actually opening it for them, they must show that they have a legitimate business interest. And even then, generally, they do need permission. So next after a credit report is the credit score. So if your credit report is a financial report card, so if you think back to middle school or high school, you had your report card with your different classes and your grades in each class, then your financial GPA would be your credit score. So that means you're adding up your performance in history and English and French and math. You're adding up your performance across all of those and averaging it to get your GPA. It's the same idea for credit score. Unlike a GPA, the higher the credit score, the better. And your credit score essentially answers the question, how likely are you to repay your loan? It represents what's often called credit worthiness. I also like to point out that your credit worthiness or your credit score is not a stand-in for sort of your worth as a person. You're not a better or a worse person because you have a higher or a lower credit score. What we're going to talk about today is the FICO score. And so FICO score is the main credit score model that lenders use. And so a FICO score ranges from a low of 300 to a high of 850. So if someone says they have a 900 credit score trying to impress you, you know right off the bat they're lying. If someone tells you they have a 0 credit score, that's also not possible. What is possible is to have no credit score. And that essentially means that there's not enough information for a score to be generated. To good pieces of information to know when sort of thinking about where to place yourself or how to sort of track your progress when you're looking at your own credit score is that one, if you're interested in buying a home, a mortgage ready or home loan ready score is about a 640. You're just generally targeting good or great credit. You want to get to at least a 720. And 720 is where a lot of opportunities start to open up. You really qualify for those low interest rates you see advertised. You're approved for different types of loans you probably might not have otherwise. So a lot of the sort of real big advantages of having good credit start to come to you once you get that 720 and up. I'd also like to point out that just because you don't have a 720, it doesn't mean you can't do anything. As you can see, there's good scores below 720. The mortgage ready score is in the fair range. So you can still do things with a score lower than 720. However, you will be paying higher interest rate. You may have a harder time getting approved for certain loans, but it's not impossible. So what makes up a credit score? The biggest component of your credit score is your payment history. That's 35% of your credit score. Essentially, this is, do you pay your bills on time? And we like to tell people that paying your bills on time is the most straightforward way to improving your credit. One good thing to know, though, is that not all bills go towards your payment history on your credit score. So when you're thinking of the kinds of bills that affect your credit score for paying them, is things like your credit card, a personal loan, student loan, car loan, any sort of bill payments that are connected to debt. Generally, those are the bills that go into your credit score. The things that don't go into your credit score are the bills that aren't connected to debt. So say, for instance, your cell phone bill. Paying your cell phone bill on time is not going to raise your credit score. On the other hand, if you get really behind on your cell phone payment to the point where it goes to collections, that will negatively affect your credit score because that is a negative account against your payment history. So that would really hurt you to miss that. So it's not saying that, you shouldn't pay your cell phone bill. You should definitely pay your cell phone bill, but paying it every month isn't going to improve your score, but missing those payments could hurt your credit score. The second part of your credit score is credit utilization. So credit utilization refers to what is called revolving credit. There are two kinds of credit that people use. The first one is installment credit. And installment credit is when you take out a set amount of money and you pay that money back over a period of time. And once you've paid it back, that account is closed. So a good example of that is a car loan. Say, for instance, I take out a car loan for $5,000 over 5 years. I make all my payments, and after 5 years, my account is closed, my loan is finished. And if I want to buy another car, I need to get a new loan. The other kind of credit that people have is revolving credit. And as it sounds, it sort of just keeps going and going and going. There's no end date, assuming you will keep that account in good standing. So a good example of that is a credit card. So as long as your credit card is in good standing, you can stay open for years or decades. And what you're doing is you're charging it up to a certain amount, you're paying it down, you're charging it up, you're paying it down. And it's a revolving cycle of you using that credit. And so when it comes to credit utilization, what lenders are looking at is how much of the revolving credit available to you are you using. A good rule of thumb that we use is no more than 30%. Ideally, only 20% of the credit available to you is what you should be using. So if I have a credit card with a $1,000 limit, the most I would ideally want to use is $200 a month. $300 at the absolute most, but I wouldn't even try and go that high. And the reason is that when lenders are looking at that utilization rate, they want to see a bit of a buffer zone in the credit available to you. It means that for them, they can feel a bit more secure that you'll be able to repay debts if they were to extend credit to you. Because if you're maxed out on your cards, it could be an indicator that you may have more debt than you can actually pay. The next part of your credit score is the length of your credit history. So that's how long you've had open lines of credit. and the longer the better. Some of that is beyond our control. If I'm 30 years old, I can't have 4 decades worth of credit history, but there are some things you can do. So that kind of goes back to sort of the keeping your accounts in good standing for as long as possible. The longer you can do that, the better, because then the lenders have a longer history of credit payments to look at so that they can feel more comfortable in predicting whether or not then they can expect you to be able to repay that loan. The next part of your credit score, which is 10%, is new credit. So that goes back to the inquiries we talked about and the hard hits that I discussed, where the hard hits are when you get a credit inquiry as part of trying to apply for a loan. And so lenders do want you to be a good consumer and shop around for the best rates for big ticket items like cars or buying a home. However, it's a red flag when they see a lot of just applying for credit willy-nilly, where you're applying for payday loans, you're applying for personal loans, you're applying for credit cards, you're just applying for credit all over the place. It can be an indicator that either A, you're a victim of identity theft and someone's just running off and having fun with your information, or B, you're in some sort of financial bind and you're just trying to get any credit you can. And in both situations, it doesn't feel like a safe investment for them in you. So that's why new credit is something you want to keep on top of, and you don't want to take out too much credit because it will negatively affect your score having a bunch of new credit accounts. The next and last part of your score is credit mix. So you want to have a mix of what I referred to earlier as the installment credit, the set amount you pay off over time, and the revolving credit, the sort of, as long as you keep your account in good standing, you can charge it up and pay it off until affinity. So you want to keep that credit mix there to prove that you are good at handling both kinds of credit. It's a smaller portion of your credit score, but it's still something that you need to be aware of. When we talk about credit scores, something that comes up pretty often is people will point out that their Credit Karma or their Credit Sesame account says one thing, but the FICO score we pulled for them for educational purposes says another thing. And so the reason that is because of what's known as scoring models. So the first scoring model we talked about is FICO. That's a private corporation that's developed this sort of like really complicated scoring model filled with sub-scoring models that they use to determine creditworthiness. What we didn't talk about is that there's a whole other scoring model called Vantage. And Vantage, like FICO, has this very complicated algorithm thing that they use to take all the information from your credit report and spit out a number that determines your credit worthiness. And so neither one is better than the other. It's kind of like iPhone versus Android. But it's good to know that that's the reason why your FICO score may be different from your Vantage score, is because the equations they use to make those models are different. So even if the information is exactly the same, the way they interpret it and the way they decide what's more important than the other can give you a different score depending on the model the app you're using is reading from. So when you are looking at credit scores and you're trying to track your progress, you want to make sure you're comparing apples to apples. So if you're looking at, your TransUnion Vantage score and that's what you want to track, you want to make sure you're always tracking your TransUnion Vantage score. If you're trying to get ready to buy a house and maybe you want to check your FICO score from, say, Experian, then you want to be checking your Experian FICO score if you want to have an apples to apples comparison every time. None of them is better. It's good to know what you're working with and to know why those numbers may be different depending on which app or which website you're looking at. So now that you've got your credit report, you know what that is, you know what your credit score is. The next part is, how do you actually get your credit report? So it's pretty simple. There are three big credit bureaus. These are the ones who generate these credit reports and gather all this information. Those companies are called Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. And generally, you have to pay to get your credit report from these companies. However, because of a piece of legislation called the Fair and Accurate Credit Transactions Act, you do have the right to get one free report every year from each of these three companies. And the way you do that is by going to annualcreditreport.com. That's the website you go to in order to get your credit report from these companies. It's really confusing. A lot of people confuse this with the website freecreditreport.com, which although the name sounds like it should be where you go, it is not where you go. That website is essentially an advertisement, and they're trying to get you to pay. When you use annualcreditreport.com, that's when you get your free report that you have your right to because of the FACT Act. And so when you go in there, you enter information, you'll get your credit report from whichever credit bureau you choose. One thing to note is that when you get your credit report, you will not see your credit score. You do have to pay extra to see your credit score from one of those credit bureaus, which is why a lot of people do use those apps like Credit Karma, Credit Sesame, or those bank apps through places like Discover where they show you your credit score. And when you do look at your credit score through those apps, it does not count against you as a hard inquiry, like we talked about earlier. It does not affect your credit score to look at your credit through those kinds of apps. So when you look at your credit score, if you notice it has errors, there are some things you can do. What you want to do is write a dispute letter and send it by certified mail, so that's mail with tracking, to the big three credit bureaus, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion, pointing out what's incorrect about your credit report and what the correct information is. If that incorrect information has to do with your credit, so say for instance, you have a car loan that says that you have a missed payment when you don't, then you want to also send that dispute letter through certified mail to that credit issuing company, also telling them what's incorrect and what the correct information is. Additionally, if it's something like identity theft or any sort of criminal activity on your credit report, then you want to make sure that the state attorney general also gets that dispute letter through certified mail to make sure that all three of those different chunks have the same information about what's incorrect and what needs to be fixed. When you do all this, you want to make sure that you keep a copy for yourself so that you have in your records what you sent to them, the date you sent it, all those sorts of things, just in case something gets lost. Finally, if there is an issue with your credit and you feel like you need to take immediate action, you can place a freeze on your credit report. What it means to freeze your credit report is basically you're sort of taking dry ice and just freezing in time the way your credit report looks on the day you freeze it. And so what that means is that no one can do anything that affects your credit. You still have to pay your bills and things like that, but no one could open a credit card in your name, for instance. They would get denied because you have a credit freeze. Some of the advantages of freezing your credit is that if you do think you're a victim of identity theft, that will stop whoever's using your credit in their tracks. So if you think someone is in this moment going around opening credit in your name, putting that freeze on your credit will mean that they no longer have access to your money. Another reason people may do it is essentially just to save themselves from themselves. So if you are really trying to work on your credit and you don't think you'll need to take out any loans for a while, some people will just put a freeze on their credit so they don't accidentally open a new account. A lot of people in the home buying process also do this just to make sure that there are no changes to their credit that could change their chances of getting their loan approved or getting their loan processed in a way that benefits them. So those are a couple of advantages. Some disadvantages are that, as you can imagine, you don't have access to your credit. If you want to apply for a new card or if you suddenly need a car loan, having a freeze on your credit means you can't do that. So no one can access your credit, not even you. It's pretty simple to do, and anyone age 13 or older can freeze their credit. The way you freeze your credit is you want to contact each of the 3 credit bureaus, that's TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. You can do this on their website, you can mail them, you can call them, just have to contact them somehow. And when you do contact them, you're going to give them your name, address, date of birth, social security number, and other personal information so that they know you are who you say you are. Because the last thing you would want is someone freezing your credit without your permission. And once the credit bureaus get your freeze request, they will give you a PIN number or a password that you need to keep in a safe place, because you'll have to use that PIN or password whenever you choose to lift the freeze. If you don't have that PIN or password available, you'll have a very difficult time lifting the freeze. And so that's why don't depend on your memory, put it somewhere safe that you know you'll have access to, that you know it won't get accidentally thrown away or something. So another thing that people are also really interested in is either building their credit because they are one of those people with no credit score, or rebuilding their credit because they have negative credit history. And so this last section of our presentation is all about tips you can use to rebuild or build your credit. And the main thing across all of these tips is knowing to use your credit wisely. So we've talked about some of these steps already, but to go over them as one big list is: 1, ordering your credit report and correcting errors. So using that free credit or annualcreditreport.com, annualcreditreport.com to order your credit report and then correct your errors. And make sure you are ordering it from all 3 credit bureaus so that you know that all 3 bureaus have this correct information. The next thing is, we like to call it a filing, not piling system. So staying organized is key to using your credit wisely. When you get a piece of mail or an email or whatever, you know, from a bill or a hospital stay or whatever you had, you want to make sure you're either filing that away and coming back to it quickly, or addressing it immediately. You don't want those bills to be piling up on your table to the point that you even forget they're there, because that plays into the next one, which is making sure you pay all of your bills on time. Like I said, paying your bills on time is 35% of your credit score. I personally have had my experience of not paying my bills on time and not using the filing system. A couple of years ago, I was getting letters in the mail about my student loan, and I was just like, oh, I'll get to it later. I'll get to it later. They piled up on a counter in my kitchen, and then all of a sudden I realized, or I found out, that I'd missed about 4 student loan payments, which really hurt my credit score. And so from that time forward, for that student loan, I set up automatic bill pay. So automatic bill pay is essentially, you tell whatever lender, okay, on this day of the month, I want you to take the money out to pay my bill. Not everyone's comfortable doing bill pay, which is fine, but it's just good to know that it's available if you're someone who the reason you miss your bill payments is just because you forget. The next one is establish an emergency fund. So emergency savings doesn't seem like it would be directly related to credit, but credit is a game and you don't want to be dependent on it to live. You're in an emergency, it is advised that you have money to fall back on. We suggest having at least 6 months of expenses. So that's sort of like the bare things you need to get by. So that's groceries, rent, heat, you know, internet, things like that, phone bill, whatever you need to just sort of like do what you need to do. Have 6 months of those expenses in an emergency fund, so that if something were to happen where you have no income, you do have a way to pay your bills. So you're not dependent on credit, because you don't want it to happen that you put all your money towards paying down this debt, and when you're finally debt free, something happens and now you have to charge up your card all over again and you're back where you started. So that's why having an emergency fund is actually really important when it comes to rebuilding your credit. The next two are sort of related in that they're not what you would think directly related to credit, but they are part of the habits and the systems you need to put in place in order to be able to work on your credit. So one is direct deposit. It'll help you save money on things like, not using check cashing or not using money orders. When you have direct deposit connected to a bank account, it just saves money in that way, which you can then put towards building your credit. The next one is budgeting. In order to build your credit, you need to know where your money is going, whether it's going towards debt, building up your savings, paying your bills on time, having a job for your money, and knowing exactly what your money is doing is extremely important when it comes to building or rebuilding your credit. And then next, I want to talk about two different financial products that are made specifically for people looking to build their credit. The first one is called a credit builder loan. And a credit builder loan is a type of installment loan. So, you take out a set amount of money and you pay it back over time. And so the way credit builder loans work is that the issue people face when they either have no credit or they don't have good credit is that they're not able to get loans because banks don't want to take a risk on them. And so a credit builder loan addresses this risk by having you put a security deposit in the bank for the amount of the loan you're taking out. So say, for instance, I want to take out a $200 credit builder loan. I'm going to give $200 to the bank as a security deposit, and then they're going to loan me $200. And then over the course of a year or however long my payment term is, I'm going to be paying back the $200 on that loan I took out. And so what'll happen is once you've paid that money off, you now have a positive payment history. You've established credit history to help with that length of credit history. And at the end, you'll not only have your security deposit, you also get the money back that you've been paying for that loan. So now you have a good pot of money that you can then put towards your emergency fund. So it helps you build your credit, and then a lot of people also use it as a really creative sort of savings challenge. The next thing that people use is what's called a secured credit card. So similar to installment loans, the issue a lot of people face is that they can't get credit cards to build that revolving credit history because credit card companies don't want to take a risk on it. So similar to a credit builder loan, what you're going to do with a secured credit card is you give a security deposit to that credit card company. And once you put down that security deposit, say $200, that deposit amount is now your credit limit. So I put down $200 as a security deposit, and now I have a credit card with a $200 limit. And from that moment forward, you essentially just use it like you would a normal credit card. When you go to the store, the clerk could not tell the difference between your credit card that's secured and a traditional credit card that's unsecured. And with that, you can also work on building those good credit habits. So keeping your utilization rate low, paying your bills on time. You'll get that good credit history that comes. And then the other thing that's good about those is that often after keeping your card in good standing for a certain period of time, these companies will often let you convert your secured credit card into a traditional credit card. So some other tips for using credit wisely, really just go to emphasize things we've talked about before. So charging small amounts to your card and paying on time. So if you go back to that $200 card example, I only want to use up to 20% of that money available to me. So that's about $40. So what people often do is they'll just charge a small amount, like say their Netflix bill, or they'll just use their card for gas, and then they just pay their bill off every month on time. So you're getting that utilization rate low, and you're getting that payment history. We also tell people don't max out your credit cards. One, it's like I mentioned before, bad for the utilization, but then also it puts you at risk of taking out more debt than you can pay off every month, because it can lead to some of the things we tell people to avoid. One, the minimum payment trap. So when you can't pay back your whole credit card bill at the end of the month, people often go to just paying the minimum payment. The problem with that is that it actually takes you a lot longer to pay back your credit card when you do minimum payments. Some cards, depending on interest, it could take you decades to pay off your balance if you only pay minimum payments on it. And so it just ends up being someone who you're just constantly rolling over your credit card balance, constantly paying interest on that. The next one is late or over the limit fees. So some credit card companies go over the limit, you do get charged a fee. A lot of companies, if you're late, you also get charged a fee. That's essentially money that could be in your pocket, and you're just giving it to them for things that potentially often are avoidable. The last thing we tell people to avoid at all costs, if we can, is cash advances. So using your credit card as a way to get quick cash. We tell people to avoid this because the interest rates are actually higher than the interest rate you pay on a normal credit card transaction. So it's very expensive money, essentially. And that's where the emergency budget comes, or the emergency savings comes in very handy. So if you have cash available for emergencies, you're not going to depend on the cash advances from your credit card, and you're going to save a lot of money because you're not paying back all the interest on the cash you took out. And then finally, don't open up a lot of new accounts, whether you have 1 or 2 credit cards or 7 credit cards. As long as you're using it wisely, you'll be fine. So there's no reason to open up a bunch of credit cards. It's not going to help you build your credit any faster. Building good habits, practicing those good habits is what builds your credit. So the final thing is that if you really are serious about building your credit or saving or any other goals you have, we like to direct people to learn more about SMART goals. So SMART goals stands for specific, measurable, adjustable, realistic, and time-oriented. And so SMART goals is a way to set goals where it really does set you up for success. An example of how a SMART goal is different than sort of goals we normally set is, say, for instance, I'm trying to build my credit, but before I get started, I really want to build up an emergency savings. I really want to get my savings underway before I start putting a lot of money towards paying down my debts to build up my credit. So a typical goal that someone might say is, I want to build an emergency savings. Like, okay, it's a good idea, but it's not specific. How much money do you want to put into your savings? So you put, say, like, okay, well, I want 6 months of expenses. It's a bit better. It's specific. I want 6 months of expenses in my emergency savings. But is it measurable? 6 months of expenses for a family with 10 kids is a lot different than 6 months of expenses for a couple with no kids. Like, it needs to be measurable. How much are your expenses every month? So you go, okay, my expenses every month are $2,000. So that means for me to have 6 months of expenses, I need $12,000. So now it's measurable. It's specific. I want 6 months of emergency. It's measurable. That's $12,000. And you can measure the amount of money you're working towards. And the third part is adjustable. Life happens, and you need to have a way to adjust your goal and your tactics to go about reaching that goal, so that if something throws you off, you don't just completely give up. So say halfway through saving this money, I lose my job. And so the goal I had may not be a realistic goal anymore. Maybe I need to adjust. So maybe while I look for a job, I'm not going to put any money to savings. I'm just gonna hold on to what I have. I'm going to use the money I have. I'm going to use it to pay my bills, and I'm going to really focus on the surviving part. And sort of once I've been established and found a new job, then I'll get back to saving again. But it doesn't make sense to keep saving towards that goal as if nothing happened while you lost your job. So being able to adjust to life happening is really important. But then that also means adjusting your goals. So maybe since I lost my job, my goal right now is 5 months instead of 6 months until I can get back on my feet. And then the adjustable part leads into realistic. So when you're setting a goal, you want that goal to be realistic. You don't want it to be too easy. So, instead of $12,000, I want to save $12. That's way too easy. That's just not going out a couple times. But you don't want it to be so hard that you just feel like there's no point in saying, I want to save $120,000 in 3 months. That's not going to happen for the vast majority of people. So it needs to be something that's a stretch, something you have to work for, while also not being so easy that you didn't really have to sacrifice anything to get there. And then the last part of SMART goals is you may have noticed that there was no time frame. Like, am I saving 6 months worth of emergency savings within 2 weeks? Am I saving it over the course of 2 years? Am I saving it over the course of 2 decades? There's no time orientation attached to this. So you want to put a time buffer on that. So for me, a SMART goal would be, I want to save 6 months worth of saving, which is $12,000 over the course of 3 years. So that's specific, measurable, and if something happens, I'm able to adjust because my goal is realistic and it's time oriented. So SMART goals is sort of the last thing I have for you all, of thinking about ways to rebuild your credit or build your credit and to utilize a lot of the information that we talked about today about what is credit, what's a credit score, why it's important, and things you can do to empower yourself to build your credit on your own, because it's definitely possible. Finally, if you have any questions or if you would like to do financial coaching, you are more than welcome to contact me or contact Prosperity Connection in general. We are definitely happy and excited to talk to you about anything you have related to credit. So thank you all very much for sitting with me during this webinar, and I hope the rest of your day goes well.